Hello everyone and welcome to another Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name is Pope. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at a homebrew of mine and personal favorite deck that I built around the mono green flash shaman Yeva, Nature's Herald. For 2 generic and 2 green mana, Yeva is a 4/4 elf shaman with flash that reads, you may cast green creature cards as though they had flash. A simple yet powerful effect sets the stage for this creature heavy deck I've named the Flash Mob. This deck is loaded with more than 40 creatures, all of which can flash in at instant speed thanks to Yeva. Among those 40 creatures, we have an army of giant green beasts ready to trample over all of our opponents, but we also have a supporting cast set to help us ramp quickly, draw tons of cards, and double down on our abundance of ETB effects. And to round out this deck, we have a myriad of threats and bombs to play in order to help close out games. And the budget for this entire deck comes in at just under $200. But now that we have an overview of this deck, let's dive in, taking a look at the jolly green giants we're going to be playing to stomp our opponents into the ground. Kicking things off with Protean Hulk, Brutalizer Exarch, and Woodland Bellower. Each of these creatures are going to help us fill out our board by bringing friends with them whenever they either enter or exit the battlefield. Protean Hulk for 5 and 2 green says whenever Protean Hulk dies, search your library for any number of creature cards with total converted mana cost 6 or less. Put them onto the battlefield. Protean Hulk is a powerful combo piece, but in our deck, we're just going to be using it for value to get the right answers for whatever the situation might be. Brutalizer Exarch is a creature that says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose one, search your library for a creature card, reveal it, shuffle your library, and then put it on top, or we can put target non-creature permanent on the bottom of its owner's library. Having flexible creatures like Brutalizer Exarch is a great option in this deck, as we can either use it to get the answer or the threat we need, or to remove any permanent on the board that might be causing us trouble. Woodland Bellower for 4, a green and a green gives us a 6/5 body. This is whenever Woodland Bellower enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for a non-legendary green creature with CMC 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield. Another flexible creature in the deck that we can use to either find answers for threats on the board or get the right cards we need to bring those threats out ourselves. Next up, we have 3 creatures going to help buff our board state with Endray's Forerunners, Pathbreaker Ibex, and Thunderfoot Baloth. Each of these creatures provide a win condition in themselves if we have the right board state whenever we play them. For a hefty 8 mana, Endray's Forerunner has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and says whenever it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2, gain Vigilance and Trample until the end of turn. Pathbreaker Ibex, a similar effect but just a little bit better, says whenever Ibex attacks, creatures you control gain Trample and get +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And Thunderfoot Baloth has Trample and says Lieutenant. As long as you control your commander, Thunderfoot Baloth gets +2/+2, and other creatures you control get +2/+2 and Trample. With a board full of big green beaters and many mana dorks, these creatures can close games out of nowhere. Next up, we have 3 creatures that are going to help us control the board state with Apex Altasaur, Bane of Progress, and Terastodon. Apex Altasaur coming straight out of Commander 19 for 7 and 2 green says whenever it enters the battlefield, it's going to fight up to 1 target creature you don't control. But it also has Enrage. Whenever Apex Altasaur is dealt damage, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. With limited creature removal in this deck, Apex Altasaur is a real all-star, coming in, fighting a creature, destroying it, taking some damage, fighting more creatures until he is either dead and off the board, or until he is at low health and then we can just stop fighting. Bane of Progress for 6 mana. Whenever it enters, it's going to destroy every artifact and enchantment on the board, and we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on it for each permanent we destroyed this way. While this is a symmetrical effect, we are not running too many artifacts and enchantments, so it will be impacting our opponents the most. And lastly, Terastodon. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. This includes land, by the way, and for each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller gets a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Triple removal on a 9/9 body for only 8 mana is pretty good. And rounding out our team of big boys, we have Garruk's Horde, Archetype of Endurance, and Feasting Troll King. Garruk's Horde says Trample, and whenever you play this card, you're going to start playing with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast the top card of your library if it's a creature card. Seeing as this deck has over 40 creatures, this is going to help us get through our deck, find the creatures we need, and profit. Archetype of Endurance says creatures you control have hexproof, and creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and can't gain hexproof. Just a really great creature to have in the deck to help protect our board, as well as enabling us to target our opponent's creatures with effects and abilities. Feasting Troll King, coming straight from Throne of Eldraine, is a new addition to the deck that I'm trialing out, but it has Vigilance and Trample, 7/6 body for only 6 mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if we cast it from our hand, we get to create 3 food tokens, and then we can sacrifice 3 food tokens to return it from our graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only on our turn. Having a 7/6 Vigilance Trampler that we can not only play for 6 mana, but bring it back for free seems like great value and a nice addition to this deck. Now that we've seen the front line, let's move on to the supporting cast that we have in this deck that's going to enable us to play all those big creatures. Kicking things off with 3 creatures that are really going to help us ramp things out. Karametra's Acolyte, Marwyn the Nurturer, and Regal Behemoth. Karametra's Acolyte says tap, add an amount of green mana to your mana pool for your devotion to green. With only a few permanents on the board, Karametra's Acolyte can start to tap for a ton of mana very quickly. Marwyn the Nurturer is a legendary creature elf druid for 2 and a green that says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 on Marwyn. Then we can tap it for a green mana equal to Marwyn's power. This deck runs a load of elves in the form of mana dorks, as well as our commander Yeva, and if we're able to pump Marwyn up thanks to our other creatures and spells, we can tap her for a boatload of green mana. And then we have Regal Behemoth, that is a 5/5 trampler. Whenever Regal Behemoth enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. Whenever you tap a land for mana while you're the monarch, you're going to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, essentially doubling what all of our mana taps for. Regal Behemoth is a real all-star in this deck, allowing us additional card draw, mana ramp, and a big beefy trampler. Next up, we have 3 creatures that are going to allow us to keep a full grip: Beast Whisperer, Soul of the Harvest, and Primordial Sage. Beast Whisperer for 2 and 2 green, and Elf Druid says whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to draw a card. Soul of the Harvest, a 6/6 trampler. Whenever another non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. And Primordial Sage, whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. And again, seeing as we are playing a very loaded creature-heavy deck, these are going to help us draw out many cards whenever they hit the battlefield. Next up, we have 3 creatures that are going to help us find the right pieces however we need to. Green Warden of Marasa, Fauna Shaman, and Duskwatch Recruiter. Green Warden of Marasa is a big elemental 5/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand, so essentially Eternal Witness. And whenever Green Warden of Marasa dies, you can exile it. If you do, you get to return another target card from your graveyard to your hand. Being able to get back the answer we need not once but twice, and for only $1.50, Green Warden is a great addition to this deck. Fauna Shaman for green, we can tap it, discard a creature card, and then search our library for any creature card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. Whether early game looking for some ramp or late game looking for a bomb, Fauna Shaman can help us get that done. And Duskwatch Recruiter for 2 and a green, we can look at the top 3 cards of our library. We can reveal a creature card from among them, put it into our hand, and put the rest on the bottom of our library. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, he is going to transform into the Kralin Horde Howler that says, creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, but at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells, we transform him back. And then we do have a set of 3 artifacts: Lifecrafter's Bestiary, Panharmonicon, and Shrionic Resonator. For only 3 mana, Lifecrafter's Bestiary is an artifact that at the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to scry 1, but the real effect that we love is that whenever we get to cast a creature spell, we can pay 1 green, and if we do, we get to draw a card. Next, we have Panharmonicon, which might just be the MVP of this deck, given we have tons of ETB and triggered effects. For only 4 mana, Panharmonicon says if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. With virtually every creature in this deck having some sort of ETB or triggered ability, we are going to be playing Panharmonicon as quickly as possible and abusing all those triggers. And then Shrionic Resonator for 2 mana, we can pay 2 mana and tap it to copy target triggered ability you control and choose new targets for the copy. A weaker Panharmonicon, but still a great card in this deck given the tons of triggered abilities we have to choose from. Now that we've seen some of the ground forces and the supporting cast we're going to be playing, let's take a look at all the bombs that we're going to be dropping, starting things off with Growing Rights of Itlimoc and the Great Henge. Growing Rights of Itlimoc, a legendary enchantment for 2 and a green that says, whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to look at the top 4 cards of our library. We can choose a creature card from among them and put it into our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library. That's a great ability in itself, but at the beginning of our end step, if we control 4 or more creatures, we're going to transform it into Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun. That is basically a Gaia's Cradle, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but a Gaia's Cradle goes for about $350. With the right board state, this card can then be tapping for a boatload of mana every turn. And then we have the Great Henge, what I believe is going to be a staple in many green EDH decks to come. For 9 mana, we have a legendary artifact that says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. We can tap it to add 2 green and gain 2 life, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and we get to draw a card. Possibly one of the greatest green cards ever printed. The Great Henge is an absolute powerhouse, enabling us to do just a little bit of everything better in this deck. Next, we have 3 bomb creatures with Avenger of Zendikar, Seedborn Muse, and God Eternal Ronus. Avenger of Zendikar is a win condition in this deck, bringing with it a 0/1 green plant token on entry for each land that we control, and then with landfall, whenever a land enters, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on each of those plants. We can flash in Avenger of Zendikar at our opponent's before us end step, then play a land, have a massive army, and then follow that up with a Pathbreaker Ibex or an Endraze Forerunner to just close out a game. Seedborn Muse, which just got the reprint in Commander 19, making it the cheapest it's been in a while, says untap all your permanents you control during each other player's untap step. With Yeva on board, being able to flash things in every turn makes Seedborn Muse a real bomb in this deck. And then we have God Eternal Ronus coming out of War of the Spark for 3 mana and 2 green. God Eternal Ronus has Death Touch, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it's going to double the power of each other creature you control until the end of turn. The creatures also gain Vigilance. And then whenever Ronus dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you can put it back into your library, 3rd from the top. After we've pumped up our creatures, we can play God Eternal Ronus to double their attack and swing in for massive amounts of damage. Next up, we have 3 sorceries that are going to wreak havoc on the board, with Finale of Devastation, Overwhelming Stampede, and Primal Surge. Finale of Devastation for X, a green and a green. We can search our library or graveyard for a creature with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield. And if X is 10 or more, creatures we control get +X/+X and gain haste until the end of turn. Tapping for 12 mana in this deck is very easy given how much ramp we have, and Finale of Devastation can go find those creatures that are going to pump our board up even more and win games outright. Overwhelming Stampede, a similar effect. Until the end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And then just one of my favorite cards to play in the deck, Primal Surge. We get to exile the top card of our library. If it is a permanent card, we can put it onto the battlefield. And if we do, we repeat the process. This deck only clocks in about 11 non-permanent spells, so Primal Surge is going to get us a ton of free spells off the top of the deck on average. And then our last 2 bombs to look at, we have 2 enchantments, Beastmaster Ascension and Lurking Predators. For only 2 and a green, Beastmaster Ascension says whenever a creature you control attacks, you can put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. As long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, all creatures you control get +5/+5. Again, with all the little creatures and tokens we'll be generating throughout the game, Beastmaster Ascension can come online maybe the turn it is played even and pump our whole board by +5/+5. And then Lurking Predator is just another wild enchantment for 4 and 2 green. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that's any spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature, you can put it onto the battlefield for free. Otherwise, we can put that back on top or bottom of our library. After casting Lurking Predators, you can believe you are going to get multiple triggers of it and get to add lots of creatures to the battlefield. But now that we've seen the roots of this deck, let's take a look at what else is inside the 99. Our removal and control in the deck boils down to about 4 to 5 effects and spells for single target removal and 1 board wipe. But with creatures like Apex Allosaur that let us fight multiple creatures at a time, they can also be used to remove any pesky threats that we might have. This deck has a huge selection of spells that are going to allow us to keep our hand loaded at all times, many of them creatures and some with ETB effects that we can double down thanks to Panharmonicon and Strionic Resonator. And then one of the things green does best is ramp, and we are going to be ramping heavy in this deck as our average CMC is over 4, so we want to make sure we're getting all the mana out as fast as we can in order to play those big beefy creatures. And our win cons in this deck are pretty straightforward. First and foremost, we're going to be playing a bunch of mana dorks to help us ramp out our big creatures and have a lot of bodies on the field. Then we're going to play those big beefy green beaters onto the field and then finish it off with spells like Overwhelming Stampede and Overrun to buff our whole force and swing in for massive amounts of trample damage. But that is going to do it for this mono green beatdown deck. Yeva is such a fun commander, being able to flash in creatures to give suboptimal blocks to our opponents, or basically give our creatures haste, flashing them in at the instep of the opponent right before us. I have played this deck for quite some time now, and I love changing things in and out, trying new cards, and it has gotten me a ton of wins. But I do appreciate everyone checking out the deck tech today. The full deck list for this can be found in the description below. If you have any recommendations for our next deck tech, let us know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this deck tech, let us know by clicking the like button, and if you want to know when our next video is released, make sure you hit the subscribe button. A new deck tech goes live every Friday at 9 a.m. Central. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.